Our planned itinerary was straight to New York from Southampton, followed by Bermuda and then Port Canaveral before finishing in Miami. However, at check-in we were advised that in order to avoid storms which were heading straight across the Atlantic, we'd be heading south to Funchal, then to New York, then Port Canaveral and Miami, missing out Bermuda altogether. Queen Elizabeth is in port with us in Southampton. That's the Isle of Wight ferry. And the tiny Hythe ferry. Our next cruise after this will be on the Queen Elizabeth. Shortly after dawn on our first morning at sea. Arriving in Funchal, Madeira in the early afternoon, 2 days after leaving Southampton. We've arrived a little later than scheduled, but we managed to get off the ship very promptly and there was time for a stroll around Funchal. The little cathedral is closed, as it usually seems to be when we visit Funchal. We found a cafe with free Wi-Fi, and after that we continued a stroll around the city centre. Heading back for the shuttle to the ship, then it's 5 sea days to New York, packed with fun. This is golf putting down the central staircase. And this chap gets a hole-in-one. There's also a glass-blowing studio to keep us entertained. The detour had avoided most of the rough weather, but the last day before New York we hit the tail end of one of the storms, and it did get considerably worse, and the last night was the worst night at sea we had. When we arrive at the New York pilot station, it's still very choppy. Our pilot coming over from the pilot station boat to board Eclipse. Approaching the Verrazano Narrows Bridge. In Port Bayonne, New Jersey, Royal Caribbean's newest ship, Quantum of the Seas. Some of our crew getting ready to photograph the Statue of Liberty. Our assistant cabin attendant, Achilles, on our balcony. As there was to be a full immigration screening of the ship in New York, we had booked the first available hop-on, hop-off bus tour from Celebrity. Even so, it was nearly 11 o'clock before our tour actually started from near Times Square. We sat on the top deck, even though the weather was literally freezing. There's the Chrysler Building. The Rockefeller Center. passing by Central Park. The Anglican Cathedral of St. John the Divine, started in 1892 and still unfinished. The tomb of President Ulysses S. Grant. By this time we were completely frozen, so we went inside the bus. After lunch and a visit to the Apple store, we strolled for a bit, but then gave up in the freezing cold and went back to the ship. In the morning, it's the USS Intrepid, a World War II aircraft carrier, which is now the Sea, Air and Space Museum, handily parked right next to Eclipse. The flight deck has a collection of military aircraft. This is a Harrier built in Britain, operated by the US Marine Corps. This is a Kafir, an Israeli-built version of the French Mirage. A Lockheed Blackbird, a spy plane built in 1967, successor to the U-2. A Grumman Tomcat as flown by Tom Cruise in Top Gun. At the far end of the flight deck is the pavilion housing the space shuttle, more of that later. An Italian Air Macchi 339. A French Étendard. A Russian MiG-17, a MiG-21. Inside, in the hangar deck, there are more exhibitions, and some operational parts of the ship are on display. This is the Combat Information Centre. This is the aircrew's ready room. A replica Mercury capsule. And back up on deck, in its own pavilion, the actual space shuttle Enterprise. Enterprise never flew in space, but was used for re-entry and landing trials. Outside, on the pier next to the ship, is a British Airways Concorde. Concorde flew faster and at a higher altitude than Enterprise ever did. We've got one more sea day before Port Canaveral, and it's time for the finale of the Egg Drop.
Drop those eggs! Woo! Go on then, drop it. Woo! Oh! Drop them eggs! Woo! Oh! Oh! Ooh! Oh! Oh, it's incredible. Oh, yes.
Next port is Port Canaveral, Florida. This is a port where you need transport, either an organised tour or a taxi, or in our case being met by our cruise friends Lynn and Steve, who are going to take us to the Kennedy Space Center. The Rocket Garden has displays of some of NASA's earlier rockets. And this, of course, is the main fuel tank and solid rocket boosters for the Space Shuttle. Our bus tour takes us past the Crawler Transporter. This vehicle brings the assembled space vehicles from the Vehicle Assembly Building to the launch pad. And here is the Vehicle Assembly Building. This is the authentic firing room used in the Apollo program, and it shows the launch of an Apollo mission in real time, complete with noises and vibrations. The Apollo Saturn V exhibition is next door. This is the bus that took the astronauts to the launch pad, and this is the business end of a Saturn V. The whole vehicle is laid out in its stages. A lunar lander. And a moon buggy. The Apollo 14 command module, which flew to the moon and back in 1971. Back at the visitor center, the space shuttle Atlantis makes a very spectacular display. And to round the visit off, a zero-gravity toilet. Next day we disembark in Miami and are met by our friends Maria and Paul, who have booked us into the Pompano Beach Marriott Hotel. So the next 3 days are spent chilling out with friends, shopping and having nice meals. A visit to the Holocaust Memorial in Miami Beach provided a quiet haven in a frenetic city. But then it's time to fly home, in time to start panicking over the Christmas preparations.